sure this is on. All right, we'll get started. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for coming to Meeting the Moment, which was created by Columbia Votes and CAPE, which stands for Civic Activism, Participation, and Engagement. And this event represents a shift in the work of Columbia Votes. During the fall, we were all about civic joy, meaning the joy of participating in our civic life. And now we're moving into civic action, which is what this is all about. And it also represents the ongoing commitment at Columbia College Chicago to ensuring that we are all informed and empowered to be positive agents of change during challenging times. So my name is Sharon Bloyd-Peshkin. I am a professor, mostly teach journalism. I'm also the faculty fellow for civic engagement here on campus, and I'm the creator and the leader of Columbia Votes. And just to note that we are live here on campus, but we are also live streaming on YouTube. And this is the first panel of 4. This one is called Making Sense of the Moment and Finding Reliable Sources of Information. Our panelists are Jaafar Aksikas, who is a professor in the Department of Communication and Culture, Jackie Spinner, also a professor in the Department of Communication and Culture, Rob Watkins, associate professor in the Department of Communications and Culture, and Sean Andrews, associate professor in the Department of Communication and Culture. And the panel will be moderated by Wyatt Menci, one of our voter registration geniuses. And so just to note, there will be time for questions at the end of the panel. And for those who are here in person, we invite you to also stick around for half an hour after the panel for refreshments and conversation. And now, I will hand it over to Wyatt.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for coming. My name is Wyatt, he, they pronouns. I'm, as Sharon said, a voter registration genius here at Columbia Votes. I'm a senior, comedy major, and I'd just like to, before we start the panel, if every one of our panelists could introduce themselves and say a little bit about the work they do related to the topic of this panel. I guess we can start my right here, go across. You have a mic.
Jaafar Aksikas. I teach in the School of Communication and Culture. I largely teach cultural studies and media studies. My work is at the intersection of media, politics, and culture as it relates to the Middle East and North Africa, and also the American context.
Hi everyone, I'm Jackie Spinner. I'm a journalism professor in the School of Communication and Culture. I'm also the faculty advisor to the Columbia Chronicle. I'm a working journalist. I still do journalism, and I really, my area is the practice of journalism.
Hi, I'm Rob Watkins. I teach here in the Communication Culture School. I teach political science courses. My work is at the intersection of politics and culture. I'm interested in films and visual media and how they communicate political ideas. And so my research, it reflects that, and my teaching does too.
My name is Sean Johnson-Andrews. I also teach in the School of Communication and Culture. I teach cultural studies courses and also courses in sort of digital media, digital theory. And my work right now, I have been, in the past I've worked on intersection of cultural studies and the intersection of law and culture. With Dr. Aksikas. And right now, my work is looking at social media, social movements, and the way that this is related to our subjectivity and identity and power. So.
Okay, great. Well, let's get started. Jaafar, first question is for you. You mentioned you study the intersection of law and culture. How do you think we should make sense of Trump's barrage of executive orders, many of which are designed to circumvent the legislative process and fundamentally change our culture?
I would say by definitely bringing some critical sense. Trump keeps talking about common sense, and I think what we need is some critical sense in questioning or interrogating. I think critical thinking, critical theory rule number 1 is that everything is suspect. And one of the conventional wisdoms is that Trump's win marks some kind of radical rupture, radical break, radical change. I think the barrage of executive orders are largely a show. if you actually compare Trump's administration, the first Trump administration, in relation to other administrations, in terms of what Trump inherited from Obama and what Biden inherited from Trump and now Trump, in terms of policies, largely they're similar policies. And I think it's still too early to tell where, I mean, we only have the past as a guide, right? We don't know the future, so we don't quite know what's going to happen in the future. But if the past is any guide, I don't see any radical change. I see it more as a show to distract from real issues that are facing the American people. The deep economic crises of all kinds, at the level of a lot of people living paycheck to paycheck, a lot of people struggling to ensure and afford healthcare, education. Look at the cost of higher education, for example, and so on and so forth.
Awesome. Would anyone else like to comment on that?
I would say that another sort of feature of what we're seeing right now is the attempt by the sort of executive branch to circumvent the law. And what's interesting is the way that, and this is something that we kind of talk about in relation to law and culture, that so for instance, to take copyright law, your copyright is only as good as the lawyers you can get to enforce it. And really that's kind of where we're at with the constitutional rights that we have. Over the last few days, we've had injunctions against the firing of federal workers, injunctions against imposing these bans on transgender people in the military, on care for transgender youth. And this is all because people have, marshaled legal resources, lawyers, to create lawsuits that stop the government, and that's a very frail way of kind of having the Constitution work. But right now that's kind of where we're at. So.
I would say that I would agree with part of what Jaafar is saying, that there is not really a difference so much in kind as a difference in degree in terms of the way that the executive orders have been rolled out by this administration. Since Obama's administration, when Congress was very close and controlled by the Republicans, the executive has been using executive orders to get around Congress because they've had a difficult time getting things through Congress. So that's been going on for 10, 15 years. But definitely there's a flood of executive orders in these first few weeks. And some of them are for show. Some of them are being tested, to be sure, and some of them are having effects. So there are so many, it's kind of hard to parse it out and keep track of everything, but I think there are at least three categories. Some for show, some that are being challenged and will certainly fail, and others that are really going to have real effects.
Thank you. Sean, actually my next question is for you. We are watching as a billionaire fires tens of thousands of federal workers and an administration aims to cut social programs that support poor Americans and give tax breaks to the wealthy. How does this square with the concept of late capitalism, and can we put this into a larger context of our cultural moment?
I mean, you could definitely not find a more sort of compact synthesis of the fact that class and capital are important, right? And that they're important kind of levers of power. And it's sort of been, I think what's one of the sort of contrasts that we see is this sort of use of something called like anti-woke, or going against DEI or anti-trans. These sort of like it's a sort of strange brand to put on this, but it's also something that this is all of these sort of divisive tactics at the level of the culture have been employed by capitalists and the capitalist class for generations, right? This is you know, the creation of race as a category is in large part as a tool of capitalist subordination. So late capitalism, we could talk about late capitalism, but you know, I think that what's sort of interesting are the other hegemonic blocks that are kind of coalescing around this, right? So this Project 2025, which is why we have a lot of these firings of federal workers. It's just sort of being, you know, administered by Elon Musk to give it some sort of tech-savvy patina, right? But this is a project that the right has had for 40 years, right? This is not a new project necessarily. This is a project that they've had since the kind of Great Society policies of the 1960s and 70s. So some of it is new, and some of it's so kind of like it appears new, but a lot of this is stuff that's been in the works since the Heritage Foundation was founded, right? So I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but I think that, you know, we're definitely in a moment of crisis, and bringing back things like tariffs, bringing back you know, like it just sort of apparently kind of taking America out of NATO, or at least like removing our sort of leadership in NATO. These are kind of maybe more novel in terms of the moment, I would say.
Any other comments or something to add to that?
One of the most ironic moments yesterday in the State of the Union address is when Trump said, basically, we need to get rid of unelected bureaucrats, right? And there were all these shouting from Democrats saying, let's start with Musk, right? I think the image of Musk, young genius man blowing up federal agencies, has definitely captured a lot of attention with the summary firing of staff at the EPA, the Department of Veteran Affairs, I mean, including Schedule A workers with severe disabilities, many veterans themselves. And no doubt, I think Dodge will do some harm, some damage, before its programmed self-destruction on July 4th, 2026. That's the date that they've put as an, Musk and Trump put that date as the date of closing shop. But I think it'll definitely do some harm.
Okay. Jackie, question for you. This administration is actively hostile to journalists and is denying access to major media outlets and newswires, instead favoring right-wing pundits and influencers. What does this mean for the quality of information Americans are getting, and what can we do to stay informed during these times?
Well, I think you're probably referencing the Associated Press, which, if you don't know, is a wire service and has been barred from covering official White House events. It's shocking for many journalists because because of the level of access that is being denied and granted, although every administration has done some variations of this. No one has ever tried to block the AP because the AP is sort of considered a very neutral and a global media outlet. But other outlets have been on, favored lists and unfavored lists. But I don't know that the American people will necessarily be harmed by the fact that nobody is there for the show, and that is what a lot of the times the press briefings are. So. I think that it's more important that journalists, maybe less so access to official Washington, that they have access to unofficial Washington, which what they are still doing. The Washington Post, the New York Times, the LA Times, the major legacy media outlets are still breaking stories about things that are happening inside the government. These are not, things that they're finding out in sanctioned press conferences. So. While I think that journalists are right to be alarmed by what's happening, I don't think that it's stopping journalists from covering what needs to be covered. For me, as a journalism professor and as a journalist, the more concerning thing is the apathy. I think that I talk to people, colleagues, friends, neighbors, And I'll ask them about the latest thing that Trump has done. And I'll say, oh, I just can't, I'm just off on a break from the news. And I think that that's more dangerous. I don't think any of us can afford to be on a break from what's going on. That kind of apathy will lead to, to problems. So I think even though it's uncomfortable to watch Trump, to watch day after day, the missives that come out of the White House, we can't afford to ignore them. I'll give you a very sort of a relevant example. The Chronicle yesterday, the Chronicle is really focused as the student media outlet here on, Trump's executive orders that impact Columbia College. And so anything to do with higher ed, the freeze on federal spending, those sorts of things. Yesterday, Trump on his Truth Social network had a post about how he wanted American citizen students who were protesting to be arrested or expelled. That is not in his purview to do that. It's totally unconstitutional to ban, free protected speech, right? And so on the one hand, you say, well, why give him the platform? Why even cover this? It's nonsense, But the thing is, when you add up the nonsense, what you have is policy. And that policy is something we need to pay attention to. The fact that, that he wants to do this, that the administration actually wants to force places like Columbia College to abandon its DEI efforts, that's very dangerous. And he does have, with federal funding, there is a lot of power in financing. So I think that I really hope that people continue to pay attention, even though it's fatiguing. And I get that it's fatiguing. I was very fatigued after the address to Congress last night. But you have to pay attention.
Yeah. I actually have a follow-up question. What sort of power does Trump have towards Columbia College, given that it's a private institution compared to like a public institution?
Well, I mean, we're a private institution, but we still get federal funding. And it's a very small percentage. I think it's less than 10%. But any student who has federal work study, those are federal dollars, right? Pell Grants, that's a federal grant. Our TRIO office that supports the most vulnerable students on our campus, that is federally funded. So nearly every college and university relies on federal funding. Those students that benefit from all of those things I just said are our most vulnerable students, and we want those students to be a part of our community. So Columbia College, like a lot of institutions, is trying to figure out how to navigate this, how to keep doing what it wants to do without drawing the attention of the administration, right? And so some of it is going to become a game of semantics. Trump was not the first one to, use DEI, the word DEI as a weapon. I mean, the right has been doing that for a while, so maybe you call it something else. And every college. Now, we are not as vulnerable as like Northwestern or University of Chicago or the University of Illinois, which has a considerable amount of money, not only for in federal funds, but also for federal research grants. And I saw Northwestern is going to have 10% cuts because of this. I mean, their PhD programs are on hold. So there's really, really serious consequences and those are private institutions I just named, right, that are more reliant on federal funding.
Okay, I have another question about newspapers. You mentioned the New York Times and the LA Times, Washington Post as a way to get reliable information, but also those are subscription-based services. Do you have any recommendations for like a free news outlet or just way to get the news for?
Yeah, I mean, I will say this, I deserve to get paid for my work. Sure, yes. I don't work for free. So I get a little bit prickly about this desire for free information. It costs to produce vetted news. It costs to produce the best journalism in the country. There is no media outlet that simply gives away its content that doesn't have to pay its staff to do it. So I'm always a little bit guarded about free sources because people still have to get paid, right? You still want to get paid to be a comedian. You still want to be paid to be a filmmaker. You still want to be paid to do your graphic design and whatever your discipline is, right? You want to get paid. You don't want to give it away for free. Well, I don't want to give my work away for free either. So, but I do think that when I make recommendations, I recommend, first of all those sources I just cited are all free through the Columbia Library. Just go to library.colum.edu and you get access, right, to those subscription while you're here. The Associated Press is, when you look at the bias chart and outlets that are right in the middle, the Associated Press is there, the BBC is right there for foreign news. Those, you can put the AP app on your phone and it's not subscription based. So because their model is they sell their stories to smaller newspapers and media outlets to run. So Associated Press, NPR is right down and people like to say it's liberal, but it's, it's really, when they've studied it, it's right down the middle. NPR News, that's free to follow that. So there are, these are legacy news sources. USAFacts.org is privately funded, and it does free analysis of government data. But I think there are ways to get information that has been vetted, that's produced by professional journalists that you can trust.
Absolutely, thank you. Is there anything anyone would wish to add to any of that?
Yeah, I just want to comment on this idea of banning journalists from the White House. That could be a blessing in disguise, right? I think that's an opportunity for journalists to go to the field and do some serious work and comment and report on the struggles of everyday working families and working Americans. And an opportunity to end this happy marriage, this cozying up to power, which we see a lot. Even in like war reporting, I've noticed over the years that journalists are no longer in the field. They're in some hotel, some fancy hotel. I'm not saying everyone, but most of them are in some fancy hotel, quoting some Pentagon, some source in the Pentagon or source in the White House. So maybe it's an opportunity for journalists to go out there and do some serious work. Also, I appreciate the list you gave, but I don't think there is any fixed list for reliable sources. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe some working list, some recommendation, but I think the best source for reliable information is our critical rationality, our critical reason, because this assumption that this source is reliable across the board, it's just not true, because you have stuff written by all kinds of people with all kinds of backgrounds, with all kinds of biases and interests and so on and so forth. That doesn't mean we couldn't, like for example, I'm a big fan of the Nation, for example, the New Left Review, the London Review of Books. These are not news paper per se, but they have a lot of political commentary and political analysis in there. But this idea that there is some kind of magic list is very dangerous. Yeah, it encourages apathy, laziness. We should always use our critical rationality, comparing and contrasting different sources, and doing the research needed to figure out what's true and what's not true.
Great, thank you. Rob, question for you. Trump has actually stated that he wishes to be a king. How much can Trump evade the system of checks and balances that are in place spread across the three branches of government?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've been shocked at the way that he has embraced the imagery of kingship. If there was anything that I thought what American government was about, it was anti-tyranny and anti-monarchy. So that's been really quite shocking, and I've been trying to do some research into the ideologists who are supporting this kind of thing, but I'll leave that to the side for now. I think it really relies, this is a stress test for our system of government. It's really a stress test, and it's never been quite tested in this way. The executive is, they're using executive orders and they're claiming powers that they don't have, and they're testing. There was just a Supreme Court decision this morning. I say that not to just say everything's going to be okay, the Supreme Court's got our back, that's not what I'm saying. But that is to say that there are ongoing tests, and one of the most distressing aspects of all of this, in my view, is the way that Congress has just been nothing, right? Absolutely nothing, and taking no, because the founders' idea was that ambition would counteract ambition amongst the three branches of government, and there's no ambition in Congress. They're just completely servile so far to this president. And so, like on a cultural and image level, I don't get the monarchy thing. And I'm surprised that there's a market for this, but I guess there is. But on an institutional level, I'm not saying the sky's falling, but this is a severe test for our institutions, and they're not as invulnerable or timeless as we might like to think.
Yeah, I just to sort of, the sort of absence of legislative action here is sort of stunning. Just on the basis of all these executive orders or executive actions through DOGE that are effectively undermining what are congressionally authorized spending. This is not actually something he should have the authority to do. So it is sort of stunning to sort of watch that, and I've tried to figure out the rationale here, especially as they're talking about doing things like cutting Medicare and Social Security, which will have really severe effects on everyday people and voters that live in especially red districts, right? It's very strange. So I think there are, one explanation which I think is sort of floating is that there is a lot of fear of vigilante reactions, right? So that not just sort of getting primaried, but in these Republican districts, but actually having threats against your family if you go against Trump, right? And so I think it's not an accident that Trump cozies up to these militias and to the sort of like very far right armed vigilantes. So I think this is something that many other countries have had to deal with. These sort of paramilitaries that are supporting a kind of tin pot dictator, and I think that we're seeing echoes of that, or sort of shadows of that right now.
I think it's shocking to me, as someone who covered Iraq and Afghanistan for many years, to hear things out of our executive branch that remind me of Saddam Hussein. I mean, seriously, remind me of like Saddam Hussein, and it's just. I never would have imagined, that, that, and the militias and the, all of that, and Trump gets away with this in somewhat the same way that other, dictators have done by, he's basically gotten rid of all the communications people in the federal government agencies, right, to centralize the information. And when you centralize the information, you don't give people the ability to inform the public about what's happening, right? And so that is the first way that people can be misled. We know that half truths or untruths have a much longer shelf life than the truth, right? And so all he has to do is go on national television, as he did last night, and say something that's completely not true, and people don't have those critical thinking skills that we want, and people will believe him. People believe that. The majority of Americans who are on disability, this includes children who get, Medicaid, are just lazy and don't work. When in fact, it's like closer to 96% of people on disability have tried to work and can't work, right? And so people will believe what they want to believe, without investigating, without critically thinking.
Yeah. Before we open up the panel for questions from the audience, is there anything that I didn't get to that you guys would like to mention or like to bring up?
Oh, I get one thing I'd just like to mention.
Sure.
As we're talking about action, is that there was a story out of the University of Cincinnati last week, which is that the Ohio legislature had passed a sort of bathroom bill, banning people of the opposite, basically mandating that people of biological sex only use bathrooms, and they had changed a lot of these signs on the campus of the University of Cincinnati, and read things like biological women on the door. The students at the University of Cincinnati did not take this sitting down. They staged protests around the college. They went around, they changed all the signs themselves. They occupied the Board of Trustees meeting, and they forced the university to rescind that decision. And the board basically said, we made a mistake. So I think that this is not a time to be completely, apathy it's important to not be apathetic, but it's also to understand that we still have the power, right? That people still have the power, and that this is the time to try to organize, try to take action. I don't know what organization went on in the campus to make that happen, but that was not a spontaneous uprising. Mm-hmm. Whatever happened on that campus, the students got together and they planned and they talked and they made really kind of deliberate actions to rescind that policy. So that's one thing I'd mention.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. All right, well, we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. If just, I guess, hand raised. Yeah.
Well, thank you for holding the panel today. I'm curious if you could discuss the impact of, there are 17 states led by Texas right now, bringing a case to the court, and as part of a larger lawsuit that talks about changing gender dysphoria is not classified as a disability. Another thing they're asking the court to declare is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act unconstitutional. And this is what the ADA is based on. If anyone has an IEP or 504 plan, that's what this comes from. I was wondering if you could discuss the impacts of this and the likelihood of the success of the case.
So the question is about, and I'm just going to repeat the question so that it comes up for the live stream, is about the 17 states and their attorneys general who have leading to overturning 504s or an ADA. I think it was last year that gender dysphoria, or in the last couple of years, gender dysphoria was added to one of the diagnoses that qualify you for a 504. We know 504 and IEPs do not apply to higher education. It's a K through 12 accommodation, and there are a lot of people with kids with disabilities who are very, very concerned about the impact of that. 504s and IEPs are funded. The funding comes from the federal government, so there is a federal connection. The real concern is for these for states, the red states, where there already isn't great disability accommodations, being hit very hard by that, right? In blue states and progressive school districts like Chicago, I think there's not as much concern, because even if it goes away, the school district could act on its own, to accommodate anyway. As some school districts do, they accommodated autism before it was officially a diagnosis for 504 qualification. But I know that the disability community is really, really concerned about this.
Another question.
I have a question for Jackie. So you talked about how the White House is restricting certain press, but you said that you are not worried and that this will not harm the American people. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that, because I'm a little bit worried.
Yeah, well, I mean, so a White House press briefing is an official event, right? When the AP was banned from the pool, because these events are covered by the pool, other media outlets shared the information with them, right? Journalists, I worked for many years in Washington for the Washington Post. I didn't cover the White House, but I covered Congress. And journalists share information. So yes, we want the Associated Press to be there. We want the Washington Post, we want the New York Times, we want CNN to be there. But just because they're not in an official briefing, there's one or two White House reporters for most major media legacy outlets. I'll use the Washington Post as an example because I worked there. 2 White House reporters or 3 White House reporters, and then 55 people who cover all the American people in Washington and other places, right? And so it's not the only way. It's not the only way that journalists are getting information. They are out in the field. They're not just going to the White House briefing and that's it. They're covering agencies, they're talking to workers, they're talking to American people all over the country about impact. And so I guess that's why I'm not as concerned. I mean, there hasn't been anything that's happened in a White House briefing that I don't know about, even though the Associated Press isn't there. I still know what's going on. It's still televised. NBC is not there, but like CBS is still there. I mean, there's still news outlets that I trust that are there. It's concerning. It's very concerning, right? But it's an extension of the attacks that he started during his first term.
Yeah, for a brief period, he kicked CNN and a few other networks out of the briefings.
Right.
I think what's also concerning with respect to the media, and maybe you could speak to this too, is these lawsuits that Trump personally is bringing against different news organizations in order to intimidate them. There was, even before the inauguration, he settled, ABC News settled a suit with him. And so my understanding, he's brought a number of different suits against organizations on suspect claims, but nevertheless has brought suit and brought them under fire and is trying to intimidate them, basically.
Yeah. I mean, it's a chilling effect, right? It's the same thing with the protests, banning protests, illegal protests, whatever that is. Yesterday, yeah. Okay, so he technically can't do that, but it provides a chilling effect. And this happened under the Biden and Obama administrations too, right? Like, when students speech, there's any kind of threat against student speech, it provides a chilling effect. So it's, the lawsuits are chilling, right? People settle to make it go away, but it has a chilling effect on the media organizations that are covering it.
Yeah, their other function is to distract too from real issues, right? Because if you look at the address yesterday, I didn't hear anything really about the struggle of American people at the level of the economy, at the level of healthcare, nothing about wages. And there was one moment where he talked about like not taxing tips and reducing income tax, which is kind of vague, and also which can be manipulated. This idea of not taxing tips could easily be manipulated by people, the billionaire class, yeah, which some of whom were there yesterday, but we had 13 of them in the inauguration. The 3 richest people, yeah, Zuckerberg, Musk, and Bezos, yeah, they were all behind him. If that tells you anything, it tells you that that's who Trump is prioritizing. And I think all these spectacles, yeah, we can't lose sight of the fact that Trump comes from, television, entertainment, and reality TV, right? So you say something outrageous to basically distract from the.
It was granting wishes last night.
Yeah.
You're an honorary Secret Service. You're into the military academies. Like, he's just granting wishes like Oprah or something last night.
He did do something last night, though, that I think surprised a lot of people. For the first time when he was talking about the tariffs, he did talk about temporary pain. When he's talked about tariffs in the past, he's always said, it's a win for America, and really talked about the benefits of the tariffs. Mm-hmm. And last night was the first time he acknowledged, probably had a speechwriter that asked him to do that acknowledged that there would be there might be temporary economic pain. I think he mentioned eggs. Once.
He mentioned eggs and
avocados.
He asked farmers to bear with him.
Right,
Please bear with me.
Which was a major concession on his part, because he has not done that. He has not sort of acknowledged that there will be deep economic pain from these tariffs, and there will be.
Yeah.
Okay. More questions?
Do you have any insights on the relation, of the lack of ambition in Congress to, lobbyists writing legislation? There was a case with Citibank lobbyists go out back, but, relevant insights on that?
I don't know that particular case, but I mean, it is the case that lobbyists have long had outsized influence in Congress. What's more surprising and more unusual is that Congress is not asserting itself in any kind of way. I mean, you would expect the majority party, of course, is in power, and they're not going to challenge the president. But with a 2-3 vote margin, they're even reluctant to do. I mean, part of the reason you're getting all of these executive orders is because it's difficult to get anything through Congress. But it is a I agree with the premise of your question. It's a long-standing problem that lobbyists, in particular corporate lobbyists, have outsized influence, and other organizations like ALEC, right, the Legislative Council, that writes these templates for these bathroom bills, for instance, right, that the same framework of legislation shows up in all these different states. It comes from organizations like ALEC. That's definitely concerning, but it's a long-standing problem.
I mean, I also think that one of the things that we're seeing, I mean, there's a coalition of different, hegemonic groups that have formed a bloc here, and one of the, when you look at someone like Citibank, the corporate agenda here, what DOJ is doing, eliminating regulatory agencies, eliminating sort of capacity to regulate. Yesterday there was a lawsuit that the Department of Justice dismissed in Louisiana. That was a lawsuit against a corporation that was sort of like poisoning the water in Louisiana, and there was the highest levels of cancer that they'd ever recorded in this district, and the Department of Justice dismissed that lawsuit. And so there's these very corporate-friendly actions that are being taken by the administration, which means that those lobbyists aren't going to put any pressure on the legislators that they have, that they lobby, because what's happening is basically very corporate-friendly for the most part, which is why you see Jeff Bezos and folks at these official events. This is not, there's all kinds of really messy, terrible things that we might be living through, but for the corporate class, this is actually, there's a lot of stuff here that they like.
And the question is why that is. I mean, why that friendliness? I mean, its origin is basically the corrupt finance the campaign finance system, right?
Yeah.
With Citizens United, it's no longer one person, one vote, right? Mm-hmm. If someone like Musk could pay millions of dollars to help elect Trump, and then he's put in charge of the federal government. So lobbying as a matter of principle is normal, right? Lobbying simply means that you have people who want to support and promote your interests. I mean, in principle, there is nothing wrong with that. But when you create laws, and the Supreme Court Citizens United is one of them, at least in my lifetime, is one of the most dangerous acts, because basically what it says is that billionaires, the billionaire and millionaire class, could spend endless amounts of money to select, not elect, to select the person they want and put him at the highest office, and other offices as well. So if anything, talking about organizing, if there is anything we should organize around, is the subversion of Citizens United, I think.
If you look at the income or the wealth of the people in Congress as well, I mean, it's not that these are separate from the millionaire class. Most of them are millionaires, or billionaires, not billionaires, but most of them are millionaires at least.
Yeah. Other questions?
A lot of what the administration is doing is instilling a lot of fear within Americans. Do you think we really should be in fear, as like some of the executive orders are for show and some of them are actually unconstitutional, or should we really not be as in fear as we are right now?
I'm scared about what will happen if the Department of Education goes away and there's lack of federal funding for my 3 kids with disabilities who all have IEPs in public school. I'm okay to be afraid about that, right? I mean, I think there are elements of this larger, agenda that are very concerning to the most vulnerable Americans, right? You know, some of it, yeah, is for show, but I'm as also, you know, I'm a foreign correspondent, and so I'm really concerned about the shifting of the world order. You know, I'm concerned about what's going to happen in Ukraine. I'm not an isolationist, and I do accept that there are many Americans who are, but those sorts of things really are troubling to me.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things to be afraid of. So.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, I don't think it's time to despair or panic or fear. It's really time to think sober, to organize, very important, to organize either at the level of smaller movements and causes, or at the level of building an alliance of movements. After all, one of my favorite people, Gramsci, talked about this idea of the pessimism of the intellect, that we need to be negative when we're analyzing stuff, when we're critiquing, right? But optimism of the will is key, right? So pessimism of the intellect, of the analysis, of the critique, but an optimism of the will around realizing, yeah, that we have power when we come together around causes. And there are all kinds of causes that need building, you know, bringing power back to labor unions, fighting for healthcare. Look at the prescription drugs, for example. There are drugs where the US is the only country that pays 10 times what we pay for these very drugs in other countries. I mean, why that is? Yeah, I mean, we keep talking and celebrating the free market, right, where there is competition. Why don't we have free market and competition when it comes to prescription drugs? Yeah, so those are the kinds of things that we need to rally around and build at the level of our communities, at the level of our colleges, and at even at the level of our neighborhoods, schools, and so on and so forth. So yes, there is a lot to worry about, but it's not time to let fear and despair overtake us, yeah, overwhelm us. We need to be composed, think sober, think about what we can do. At the end of the day, my theory is that a lot of people didn't vote for Trump because they liked Trump. Yeah? They voted against a whole system, right, that was marginalizing increasingly more and more people. I mean, can you believe that the minimum wage is $7.25 at the federal level? I mean, can you buy eggs with that, Jackie? $7.25 is still the minimum wage. So, you know, those are the kinds of movements and campaigns that we need to build.
I think there's reason to be fearful, but in targeted ways. I mean, I'm not concerned that, you know, that this is going to become, you know, some Nazi regime, you know, overnight. The way, when I look around the world and I see the kinds of regimes that are where we might be headed, they don't look like that, but they look hollowed out. The things that are happening at the Justice Department are really concerning. The way that prosecutors are being fired, the way the cases are being dropped, the kinds of things that Sean mentioned. So there are things, definitely things to be concerned about, and places we can target our attention. But I don't have this big, huge blanket fear of, you know, some total Nazi regime or something.
Well, I think all those things kind of can go together on a certain level, right? I mean, I think the fear, one of the things that is very scary is the way that the power dynamics are shifting. How does power work? How does the executive, you know, administration of power operate, right? The idea, because there's also this sort of element floating underneath all of these cases, that the administration, the executive, is still responsible for executing the law, and so that it's actually there's a choice there on a certain level, right? There's a kind of precedent of Andrew Jackson getting the Supreme Court ruling that said you can't move the indigenous communities from Florida, and he said, well, they've made a ruling, let them enforce it, and then he moved indigenous people across the country, right? So and that is the kind of executive action that Trump kind of believes himself to be capable of. And so I think part of what we need to look at is that all of these different elements together show that we're all in this together. And so there is a really important space for coalition building, because no one is safe, right? If you believe yourself to be safe under this regime, you're wrong, right? Because it's that poem that if you have to read all the way to the end, they finally came for me, right? And that's where we're at. And so there's the fear is there, and I think we should honor that. Take our self-care. Definitely take care of yourself, because we got to wake up in the morning tomorrow and fight.
Yeah. I think we have time for a couple more questions. Sharon?
I would love to hear your thoughts about the backsliding of liberal democracy and what we've seen in other nations, how we've seen backslidings, and how sometimes we've seen rebounds, right? Back in the other direction. And just looking, across our borders at other models and what sense you can derive from that in terms of the fragility of liberal democracy and the strengths of it, sometimes to rebound.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think about Ukraine, for instance. Ukraine had before Zelensky, there was I forget his name, Yanukovych, perhaps. Anyway, there was a man in power who was favorable to Putin, and then there was,
a coup.
Yeah, exactly. And so there is a lot of democratic backsliding around the world lately. Places like Hungary, places like India. But yeah, those story, the possibility for a rebound is a kind of story that I think we need to highlight as well, because I think midterm elections are in less than 2 years, and I personally don't have any patience for anybody who's like, oh, whoa, maybe we'll even have elections. No, we will have elections. We will be out there, and we will be organizing. I don't have any patience for the kind of despair that says that wants to question that. No, we will plan on it. We will be there, and we will uphold the democratic institutions as best we can. But they are not self-correcting, to be sure.
Fundamentally in Western culture, there is a tension between democracy and capitalism, right? These are two things that are in tension. And so the backsliding of democracy, what we see in many of these cases is that you have an increased level of kind of corporate capitalist concentration, and that gets sort of covered over by reactionary, racist, sexist, misogynistic, homophobic kinds of policies, traditionalist kinds of policies. And that traditionalist vein we see in Hungary, we see in Russia. You can see it on a certain level with Modi in India. It was in Brazil. Now there's in Argentina. So, but it's going back and forth. And I think what that kind of illustrates is that the coalition needs to also have in mind those kinds of progressive values, but also tempering capitalism, tempering that system that is most likely going to take the reins.
Building up the nerve to address the real
which is part of the reason that you have the liberal democracy backsliding, is that people don't see any place that institution does anything to improve their quality of life, right? Because a lot of the things that would help us are already decided by lobbyists and corporate influence over elections. So
absolutely. I think we have time for one more question. Does anyone have a question? Yes.
I was a few minutes late, so I apologize if you covered this earlier, but do any of you see an individual or a coalition that you think is strong enough or has a sense of what's happening to get behind as an opposition?
Is anyone following the National Park Service, Alt National Park Service? I have been so curious and amazed by the coalition that they're building, that, you know, this idea that park rangers will lead the revolution. But the Park Service and the National Forest Service are both have this alternative movement that has started. That I don't know how effective it will be, but it's really interesting to watch. Resist. That's their. I mean, they've taken Smokey the Bear and he's sort of their advocate with resist on his hat, and so it's really I'm just fascinated by it. These are mostly federal workforce that are looking at the ways in which the very hurried cuts to the federal government are affecting people.
Along that line, can you recommend some ways that students, people in this room, can respond to this moment from your vantage point? What should people be doing?
Everything and anything. I mean, reading groups, joining students' organization, organizing at the level of Compass. And to address your question, there is a movement for building a third party led by Cornel West. I don't know if people are following. Interesting movements around the bankruptcy of these choices that we get dealt with the two-party system. You go to the grocery store and there are like hundreds kinds of cereals, yeah, and 50 kinds of yogurts. And suddenly when it comes to presidential elections, we get to choose between Trump and Biden, yeah, or Trump and Harris. So that points to the bankruptcy of liberal democracy, or at least formal democracy. Because at the end of the day, what Sean was pointing out is the intensification of that contradiction between a predatory form of capitalism, or a destructive capitalism that wants to squeeze everything to the benefit of the billionaire class, and some notion of democracy. Earlier we were talking about this notion of free. I mean, nothing is free. What you were referring to is a huge debate since the founding of the first institution of media, which is the post office, right? A lot of people don't know that the post office was founded on the grounds of a lot of literature by the founding fathers around this idea that in a democracy where people govern themselves, yeah, the assumption is that you want to have informed citizenry, right? An informed citizen. So in addition to supporting news organization, because it costs to produce, we should also be fighting for fighting that struggle between people who want news media organization to be corporate entities and people who want news media to be held to different standards. Take the example of social media platforms. In terms of their incorporation as business entities, they're not classified as news. They're not like CNN, Fox, yeah? That's why you had Fox News settling when they said, for example, that the machines were gamed or played, right? But how do social media people get away with it? They say we're not news organizations. We're not.
There's a loophole.
We're just a platform where people come and share all kind of content, right? So maybe that's something we could rally around and change, right? And create different categories for these social media organizations.
I just want to say one last thing, or I want to say one thing, which is don't listen to these arguments against whatever we call it, DEI, woke. These are, the largest movement in U.S. history, the largest march was 5 years ago, right? The Black Lives Matter movement after the murder of George Floyd. This was a scary time for the corporate and sort of political class, and I think that they need to be scared, and so we need to keep making them scared. So don't listen to that rhetoric.
Okay, well, thank you guys so much. I think that brings us to the end of panel number 1. Give the mic back to Sharon.
Yes, it does. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us for this today. I hope you found it valuable. I hope you find it encouraging that you have a role to play in the moment and some ideas about how that works. Before we break, I want to make a couple quick announcements. The first is that Columbia Votes is sponsoring a book club that's begun by and run by students. It's called BRANCH, which stands for Bringing Real Action and Nurturing Civic Hope. They're just organizing now, and if you're interested in joining this book club, email vote@colum.edu and we'll put you directly in touch with the organizers. So that's vote@colum.edu. And the most important announcement is we have refreshments outside, right outside the door here. We'd love for folks to stick around, talk to each other, talk to the panelists, and just sort of process what we've been talking about for the past hour. So thank you very much for coming.